I packed my animals and my gear in my truck, and I headed for the Serengeti Plains of Tanzania.
Say Baba, Imitola, say Baba, Imitola, say Baba, Imitola, say Baba, Jambaba, Untarati, Jambaba, Jambaba, Untarati, Jambaba, Jambaba, Untarati, Jambaba, Imitola, say Baba, 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 Jambaba, Untarati, Jambaba, Jambaba, Untarati, Jambaba.
At about this time of the year, lionesses are having their young on the Serengeti Plains. They usually have 3 or 4 cubs to a litter and stay with them for about 2 years to protect them from danger when they're tiny and to teach them the fine art of hunting. Lion cubs don't know all the fine points of stalking their prey by instinct. They have to learn these through long, hard hours of instruction from their mother. If they make a mistake, they get cuffed good and hard, and they learn mighty fast. Lions show real affection for one another, pretty much as in the case of human beings. They have a very closely knit family life. But when a lioness has her young, she is usually in a very nasty protective disposition, and this is no time to disturb her or to get too close. But she is very patient and accommodating toward her cubs. She is literally a mobile milk bar out here in the hot, dusty plains of Tanzania. A unique thing about lionesses is that they will nurse cubs from another litter besides their own. They never cared less whose cubs they are. For example, here you'll see that one cub is much larger than the others, which shows that this lioness is babysitting for another lioness who's gone off hunting. Sort of a cooperative society. Yep. Life is one big bowl of cherries when you're a lion cub. Ma and Pa do all the work and you have all the fun. These cubs will be full-grown lions in less than 3 years. Adult males weigh about 450 pounds, adult females about 350 pounds. Animals can tell when lions are out to make a kill, and when they know that they're not, they will stand by and let one pass very closely. It's sort of a sixth sense that animals have that lets them know this. But these wildebeest and zebra know that this old boy is up to no good, so they give him a wide berth. Actually, he is frightening them to a point downwind where the lionesses are lying in wait with their cubs, because it is the lionesses that usually do the killing for a pride, not the males. Males will condescend to help, but they leave the dirty work up to the ladies, pretty much as in the case of human beings. There is not a tree for miles around, and it's 110 degrees in the shade. Boy, I wish that old man would hurry up and bring home the bacon. So he accommodates and shifts into second. Now he shifts into high. And this ostrich decides this is no place for him. And these two hartebeests say, boy, let's get out of here. This is no place for us. In less than an hour, there is nothing left but skin and bones. Lions know what it is to go hungry. Sometimes they do without meat for 4 or 5 days. So when they have a kill, they make the most of it while it's available. They literally gorge themselves, leaving nothing behind if they can possibly help it. Now I headed north, and on the way I crossed an improvised log bridge. The unsettling thing about these bridges is that you never know what load they're built to withstand until you get to the other side. Then it might be too late. On the way, I saw one of the most fabulous sights in all of Africa. Kalambo Falls, the highest waterfall on the continent, twice as high as Victoria, a 720-foot drop. It's situated way down at the southern tip of Lake Tanzania on the Tanzania-Zambia border. This waterfall is so high, the entire river atomizes before it strikes bottom. So it's a perfectly silent waterfall. There's no thunder here whatsoever. Its name, Kalambo, means greatest of the great in the local vernacular. Zebras have few pleasures in life, but this is one of them. On the way, I discovered that I had several broken spring blades, and I took time out to apply homemade steel clamps. During the years that this safari lasted, I had 19 broken spring blades and 15 flat tires. I brought this truck to Africa on a freighter and sold it in Cape Town a few years later. It is now owned by a man in the suburbs who uses it for selling vegetables. These natives really were a great help. I don't know what I would have done without them. I made a base camp here, and one day as I returned from a hunt, I heard a very strange sound. Two young leopards. I took a quick look around for Mother Leopard because she would be very displeased if she knew I was going to adopt her cubs. They were about 3 weeks old and weighed 2 pounds apiece. I called them Sputnik and Mutnik. As far as I know, Mother Leopard never did follow me back to camp. At least I never saw her. They were so tiny, they just didn't know what fear was. They are now full grown, and they live in the zoo in Rochester, New York. I had some dehydrated milk already prepared for my baby antelope, and of course I always carry baby bottles with me when I'm on safari. They're one of the most useful items of equipment. Oh, Mother Leopard must have been away a long, long time. I fed them up on calcium gluconate, cod liver oil, vitamins, milk, and meat, and they doubled their weight in a month. Leopards are easy to raise, and they make wonderful pets. One day, as they were playing at my feet, one of my natives shouted.
Bueno, bueno, mamba!
And there he was, a black mamba, the fastest and deadliest snake in Africa. I ran for my snake stick because these snakes are highly sought after by zoos in America, and I'm going to try to capture him alive. The poison of a mamba acts very much like the poison of a cobra, paralyzing the nerve centers of the body, but it acts much more quickly than cobra venom. I had no serum for the bite of a mamba, so I had to be very careful how I handled it. Mambas have the characteristic of traveling with their heads held high above the ground, which makes it very difficult to pin them down. When a mamba is angry, he flattens his neck. There. Now I have his head pinned down. And now it's all over but to pick him up and pop him into a sack and send him by air to America. He is perfectly uninjured and in excellent condition, and he measured exactly 8 feet long. Mambas are long, thin, graceful snakes, and they have real poise. But life on safari has its more prosaic moments. For example, sometimes you have to hang up your pajamas. And there are camp pets that require attention from time to time. Natives come to me constantly looking for medical care, like this Maasai tribesman who has a bad eye infection. These tribal natives look upon all Europeans camped in remote bush country as doctors. They believe we all have magical powers, and every day I have at least 3 or 4 natives coming to me looking for medical care. I gave him some penicillin capsules and a cup of water. But if you remember, these Maasai drink about as much water as a Frenchman, so I had a devil of a time getting him to swallow these capsules. Notice how reluctant he is about the whole thing. Nope, he doesn't think much of that drink. I asked this fine-looking tribesman to come back the next morning for some more penicillin. His trouble was cleared up in 1 week. There are lots of chores to take care of around camp. My baby reed buck needed her bottle every 4 or 5 hours. And Trudy whooped and hollered like a little girl looking for attention. And I had to take time out occasionally for a bath for myself. And out here, there was such a water shortage that I had to bathe in dishwater and save the water after the bath. Meanwhile, Sputnik and Mutnik fought over last night's kudu bone. Leopards grow very fast, and in just 7 months, these leopards grew to be a real armful. But chimps don't grow nearly as fast as leopards, and every time I took these beasts out of the compound, Trudy ran for the truck. She wanted no part of these animals anymore. Old Sputnik loved to play roughhouse, and you just couldn't be too rough with him. You could drop him and kick him and step on him right up to the point of breaking his ribs, and he'd come back for more. He loved it. But the thing he loved the best was to be laid on his back and tickled. Sputnik had a passion for going for the back of my neck. After I'd played roughhouse with him, the back of my neck was scratched and bleeding, but of course, it was all in fun. Sputnik weighed about 75 pounds at this point. Boy, I wish he'd leave the back of my neck alone. Sputnik's favorite playmate was Jackie, a dog that belonged to a professional hunter in Livingston. And although they were about the same size and weight, you can see that nature intended them for entirely different functions by the difference in the size of their paws. These two fellas were fast friends. They really loved each other. These are 2 lions in the Springs Game Reserve in the Transvaal. I included these pictures to show that alongside of Sputnik and Mutnik, these 2 fellas had absolutely no manners whatsoever. They are not my lions, I'm just visiting them. Each time I played with these beasts, it cost me a shirt, a pair of pants, and a bit of hide. there's the beginning of the end of my shirt. One day, a little boy came running to my camp and told me that a native in the nearby village had been bitten by a cobra a few hours before. I grabbed my hypodermic syringe and serum, and I followed him. But I was too late. I heard a native woman shout Noha, which in the Salosi language means snake. It was an Egyptian cobra. I couldn't find a stick long enough to pin him down with, so I'll use a twig and capture him by distracting his attention with the kerchief while I grabbed his jaws from behind with the other hand. He is a very deadly snake, and I've got to be certain of my aim. This is my helper. This is the snake the American Museum of Natural History was looking for. They believe that Egyptian cobras from this district are a new subspecies, so I sent him off to the museum by air express. A couple of months later, I pitched my camp in a village of Bushmen and recorded their strange language for a professor of anthropology in America. I asked this bushman to tell me how he collected honey in the forest, and I took it down on my tape recorder. And then I played it back to him. He refused to believe that that was his own voice. When it was all over, he told me that the little man in the black box said exactly the same thing the same way he did. After recording his voice for posterity, I gave him some stainless steel mirrors and inexpensive knives. Then I had a chat with the Induna, or local chief. He had a sad story to tell me. He said that a lion had killed their hunting dogs. This was a real catastrophe for them, because they depended upon their dogs to help them get fresh meat. He asked me if I would shoot the lion. I promised I would look for him the next day and shoot him if possible. I started out the next morning with my two best Bantu trackers from the carcass of one of the dogs, which showed lots of fresh lion tracks. Judging by the size of the tracks, he was a very large lion indeed, and judging by the freshness, he was very close. We knew we would come upon him in a matter of minutes. Must have wounded him badly. Ndio bwana, bunduki piga simba, which in Swahili means, yes bwana, the gun did strike the lion. After me, George. The third shot went through his spine, and he died just as he struck me. He was a full-grown male that weighed about 450 pounds. I asked my native to go to the nearest village and bring back a lot of others to help carry this beast back to the camp for skinning. That African who is waving his arms in the foreground was accidentally shot and killed the next day by another native with the same rifle that shot that lion. It is a good object lesson in the fact that you can never be too careful in the handling of firearms.
Asina tombitina, esifanele ukukana. Asina tombitina, esifanele ukukana. Ubani loza ngitophe kuseni kangaka.
Then I headed for Fort Portal, Uganda, where I had been invited by the government to witness the rare event of exploration in modern times. There is a huge marketplace here for natives. Fort Portal is the traditional jumping-off point for expeditions up the mountains of the moon, otherwise known as the Ruwenzori Range. And it was here that I met with the chief mapper for Uganda. He explained that the government is sending an expedition to the top of the mountains of the moon to map the upper reaches of the Nyamagusani River, which has never been seen or mapped above the 7,000-foot level before. He explained that the river valley is constantly shrouded in clouds, and aerial photos have shown nothing of it because of the solid cloud coverage. According to the government, no one to their knowledge has ever set foot in that river valley above the 7,000-foot level before. 3 weeks later, we started out at the north end of Lake Edward with 50 African porters. The first order of business was a negotiation over wages, and this consumed exactly 2 hours. After compromising on a wage, we got together the food for the porters. We had 150 pounds of dried hippo meat, 600 pounds of peanuts, 1,200 pounds of cassava flour, and a live goat and sheep to provide fresh meat. We doled out blankets because where we're going, the altitude is high and the temperature is low. Ruwenzori is higher than any of the Alps in Europe. The summit is at 16,800 feet above sea level, and there's ice at the top year-round. Head loads were weighed out at 50 pounds apiece. We have a 50-mile walk ahead of us because we're crossing the range in the long direction from south to north. Now starts a long, hard 3-week climb, which cost us the life of one man before it was finished. Cheetah wandered in off the plains to the foothills of Ruwenzori. And it was here that we saw more than a dozen different kinds of lizards. The streams were numbingly cold because they were the runoff from glaciers. We saw lots of game in the rainforest on the approach. Even a few pythons. Soon we left far below us the villages from which our Bakonjo tribesmen came. We picked these Bakonjo because they live in the foothills and are accustomed to carrying heavy loads up steep slopes. They are tough, wiry Africans. The chimps that we saw along the way were talking to each other in Chimpanese. Some of us camped in a clearing on the right. And some on the left. One of our men caught a tree hyrax in a snare, and they carved it up for supper that night. It was here that we saw the typical creeping, crawling creatures so characteristic of this part of Africa. including the safari ant, the most insidious insect in all of Africa, bar none. At the end of the 8th day, our natives collected moss for mattresses. Then they broke out their cassava flour, which is made by grinding the roots of the manioc tree. This is their staple diet. They mix it with water, stir it over a fire, and roll it into little balls and pop it into their mouths. And it tastes terrible. But they love it. They also had mutton for the evening meal. We didn't go much for the cassava flour, so we broke out some tinned goods. The man on the left is the head of the Department of Lands and Surveys for the Uganda government. And this is a British mountain climber who was invited to guide us across the ice fields. He's had considerable experience climbing the Himalayas of Tibet. And this seedy-looking character is yours truly. After a satisfying meal, the boys fashioned pipes from long-stemmed jungle plants. And then the clouds rolled in. Ruwenzori is almost constantly shrouded in clouds. In a few minutes, the visibility dropped to a few yards and it was cold and clammy. This is typical Ruwenzori weather. Next morning, we got up early. We took sightings on the elevations of nearby peaks and found in many instances the latest government charts were in error. And now the temperature dropped close to the freezing point. There's the valley through which the government suspects the Nyamagusani River flows. They're not sure because it has never been seen above the 7,000-foot level before, and we are much higher than that now. As usual, it is shrouded in heavy mist. And there is the source of that river at 13,500 feet above sea level. This is the first time it has ever been seen or filmed. The river had an eerie appearance because it was so heavily shrouded in mist. We wanted to map the upper reaches of this river, but we were defeated by logistics because we had a 7-day march to a point where an advance party had cached away food for the porters at a forward base and had only a 7-day supply of porter food remaining, which meant that we had to start out the very next day if we were to keep from running out of food. This happened because our porters were eating at a higher rate than we had calculated on. The river flowed through a forest which was festooned with hanging moss. We saw a placid pool at the 12,000-foot level. We checked our charts for the best approach to the rock divide which separates us from the snow peaks, which is where the advance party had cached away the food. And now starts the hardest, coldest part of the climb. It rained for 17 days out of the 3 weeks, which made the rocks doubly slippery and treacherous. All of our gear was constantly soaking because of the incessant rain and because the sun never shone long enough for us to dry it out. When the temperature dropped below freezing, we found we often had ice in the tent in the mornings. One of the men in the advance party died of pneumonia 4 days after they crossed the tree line. He was a 31-year-old Briton. This is the first time in my life that I had ever climbed a really big mountain, and it will probably be the last. We saw a lake which was discovered 2 years previously, but which remained unnamed. It is the policy of the Uganda government to name new geographical features after local names. Our guide said he calls it Cachope. Henceforth, on all government charts, this will be known as Lake Cachope. This is the top of the rock divide which separates us from the snow peaks. And there at the foot of this glacier are two tiny huts. In one of these, the advance party cached away food and left behind one of their men who's been awaiting our arrival for 1 week. Needless to say, he was very pleased to see us. He is a young Oxford graduate who is now in the government service in Tanzania. He said that he had taken sightings on the elevation and azimuths of nearby peaks and found many errors in the latest government charts just as we had. It's not hard to realize when you consider that Ruwenzori was discovered less than 100 years ago, and a good deal of the upper reaches still remain incompletely mapped. After a warm meal in his hut, we started out across the ice fields, which, believe it or not, are right on the equator. There is ice up here all year round. We are at the top of Stanley Mountain, at the very summit of the Mountains of the Moon, with Uganda on our left and the Congo on our right. These glaciers are actually rivers of ice. Our progress here dropped to less than 1/2 mile per day, not only because of the rarefied air, but because of the steepness of some of the glaciers that we had to cross. There were huge crevasses which were about 200 feet deep, covered by a thin crust of ice, and we had to be very careful how we walked across these areas not to fall through. These are the very first drops of the White Nile from a glacier melting at the top of Ruwenzori. These drops join together with the drops from other glaciers to form tiny rivulets which race down the rocky faces. These rivulets join together to form little streams that run through the vegetation a few thousand feet below. And the streams combine to form a real river which ultimately becomes the mighty Nile of Egypt. At this point, the entire volume of the Nile surges through a narrow cleft of rock only 19 feet wide as it races toward Lake Albert. There is tremendous thunder and power in this tiny little chasm. So it is here on the roof of Africa that the Nile is born, nearly 4,000 miles from its mouth in the Mediterranean. From rivers of ice to mountains of fire. Less than 100 miles from Ruwenzori, a volcano was in full eruption. I asked the owner of a light plane if he would fly me over it. He said he would be pleased to, as he'd seen the smoke from the eruption a few days before and was just as curious to see it at close range as I was. This volcano was born from a perfectly flat forest when a fissure suddenly opened up in the ground and molten lava flew skyward. It was one of the rare instances in recorded times that a volcano was born from a perfectly flat surface. We saw great destruction to the forests below us as a result of the lava flows. A river of molten lava flowed for 16 miles through the forest, causing the destruction of thousands of acres of woodland. Those patches of white are steam resulting from the rain that's falling now, vaporizing when it strikes the hot lava. We felt intense heat inside the cockpit on the side facing the eruption. This is how the sun looked through the column of steam coming out of the crater. Back down on the ground, I hired 4 Congolese to carry my photo and camping gear, and we went on a foot safari to get a closer look. The acid fallout from the crater killed all the vegetation for a radius of 20 miles. The trees are completely denuded of their leaves from the acid fallout. The lava fields were very, very hot, and we had to step lively. It was raining, and when the rain struck the hot lava, it vaporized instantly, cutting our visibility down to a few yards. At times, we didn't know whether we were walking toward the volcano or away from it. The only way we could tell was by homing in on the tremendous roar, and sometimes this was very deceptive. We had to call to each other constantly to keep from being separated, and in spite of that, one of my natives was lost for more than an hour. When the rain stopped, the visibility cleared, and we found this kingfisher, which apparently died from the intense gases coming out of the crater. Now we were walking across scoriaceous lava. That is, huge blocks of very jagged lava, which is sharp as glass, and you must be very careful how you walk across it, not to let the calves of your legs rub against it, or it would cut them to ribbons. When we were within half a mile of the eruption, we were walking on about 14 inches of porous black ash, which crunched audibly as we stepped across it. Some of this light black ash was being carried more than 20 miles away by the winds aloft. Molten lava flowed around tree trunks, and the intense heat consumed the lower part of the trunk, leaving gaping holes, and you had to be very careful not to step in one of these. The temperature of molten lava is about 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, or about the same as molten steel. I threw a rock in this river of molten lava, and it bounced and floated, because it was the same density as the river itself. There were huge boulders floating in the river, boulders as large as automobiles. This lava is coming from about 30 miles below the Earth's surface. This river is 100 feet wide, and it is flowing through the west branch of the Great Rift Valley in the eastern part of the Congo in Kivu province. My natives were deathly afraid of this volcano, not only for obvious reasons, but because they were so steeped in superstition, they thought this was their fire god, and they thought that if they got too close, he would recognize their faces. So I had to pay them a bonus to get them up this close. In spite of the bonus, they moaned and groaned and groused like a bunch of GIs the whole trip. You never heard so many tales of woe from so few men before in your life. In spots, hydrogen gas seeped to the surface and burned. And when hydrogen burns, it forms water vapor. And this is one of the rare examples of newborn water on the face of the Earth. volcano erupted continuously for 5 months, and then, after causing destruction to thousands of acres of woodland, the eruption slackened. And then I could look right down into the throat and see the boiling, seething lake of molten lava at the very bottom. I came to Africa in a quest for high adventure, and now I was leaving it with the feeling that I had found it indeed, and more than a fair share for one man.